Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this morning's session. This is the first of our new QuickSight monthly customer webinar series. This is a session that's intended for QuickSight customers to get an opportunity to learn about new features that we've added into the product, get some tutorials on how to use them, when to use them, as well as see demos of all of the new functionality applied in practice. My name is Quentin Osbury. I'm a product manager on the QuickSight team, and I'll be hosting the session today along with Joe Kunakal, who's a principal PM on the QuickSight team as well. And also joining us is Sahicha Pandiri, who's also a product manager on the QuickSight team. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A panel. We will set aside a good 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the session for live Q&A, and we'll also try to answer your questions as we go along in the Q&A window. So with that, I'll hand over the session to Joes, who will be leading us through this morning's presentation. Joes?
Thank you, Quentin. And as I get my screen shared, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I know we have people from different parts of the world today. So let me quickly share my screen and we can get started. So in today's session, what we're going to cover is a walkthrough of the new dashboard embedding feature that we launched at reInvent. We are going to go through some new features that we launched through December and January in QuickSight. And then we have time for the Q&A that Quentin mentioned so that we can address your questions sort of real time. Before we get into the bulk of the session, let me just take a moment to go back and just walk through the key aspects of QuickSight. So QuickSight serverless, it scales easily. Whether you have 10 users or 10,000, you can build end-to-end BI within AWS with things like private VPC connectivity, Athena connectivity, and such. And it provides pay-per-session pricing for the bulk of your users who are the readers or consumers of data. So these are, just key highlights of QuickSight at a glance. I know a lot of you are existing customers, so you had adopted us for some of these very aspects. But the two features that we launched at reInvent last year were ML Insights and Dashboard Embedding. So I wanted to take a moment to remind you to sign up for the ML Insights preview if you haven't already. Just go to the QuickSight homepage, quicksite.aws, and you'll find a banner right there where you can sign up for it. We whitelist customers every Friday, so we should be able to get you in pretty quickly once you sign up. This will allow you access to some of the latest features that include automated narratives. We have anomaly detection and also machine learning based forecasting. So things that the folks in preview have loved so far. Now the feature that we're going to talk about today is dashboard embedding. And what I wanted to do was at a high level set expectations and let you guys know what dashboard embedding in QuickSight means. So with dashboard embedding, what we want to allow you is embed fully interactive QuickSight dashboards with drill downs, filtering, and the external links. So you can link out from an embedded dashboard to another page that might be your own application. These dashboards are just as you see them in QuickSight. So you create them in QuickSight and then you embed them in your application. The intent at this point is that this embedding feature should work great for anybody who has an application within which you want to embed this. There are simpler forms of embedding that we will look at in the future. For example, if you wanted to just embed this in a wiki and just have people come and access it without any identity. But today, what we offer are personalized views of data, which will enable things like row-level security and dynamic defaults. This also means that when you embed QuickSight dashboards in a portal, the licensing model is such that every viewer of the dashboard needs to have a license. Now, this license would be the reader license, which means that it's pay per session. And our pay per session model is such that you pay 30 cents per session, but you pay no more than $5 in a month. So it means that every reader who comes in will be charged a max of $5, but if they don't access the system, they're not charged at all. If they access the system a few times, so let's say they access it 2 times in a month, they will get charged 60 cents. So that's the pay per session model that we've seen a lot of great feedback from in Enterprise Edition. So we have extended that to our embedding model as well. As with QuickSight, there are no servers to manage. So when you embed something with QuickSight, you don't provision a server. You don't have to manage it in the back end or upgrade it as your user base grows. So it's all just taken care of by QuickSight. Authentication for these dashboards. So remember I mentioned that these need to be authenticated. Every viewer needs to have a license. Authentication happens via federated single sign-on. This means that you can federate your users into QuickSight, into AWS, and then allow them to access the dashboard seamlessly. There is no login page that the user sees. There is no QuickSight specific login that your user has to go through. So if you're, for example, hosting an application where you already have your credentials stored, whether they are, let's say, in a database or whether they are incognito or in an Active Directory, you will be able to federate the user into QuickSight with an identity, so that you know that this user's identity in your system, and then you also know their identity in the QuickSight system. Lastly, as part of the launch of embedding, we also launched our JavaScript SDK and APIs for users and groups. The JavaScript SDK allows you to easily embed the dashboard on your page. So that way, all you do is you get the authenticated URL, the signed URL from QuickSight. Now we'll just in a moment find out how you do that, and then you plug it into the JavaScript SDK. The SDK will take care of sort of loading it up. It will give you options to call back and also look at setting parameters and such. The user and group APIs will allow you to provision users. Now you can provision users ahead of time and also group them into logical groups of users. And then you can use these groups within the product just as you today use the users. So now what I'm going to cover is a quick example of the sequence of steps that need to happen when you embed a dashboard. Remember that this is not the flow that you would use when you are embedding it in your application, but it's more intended to be an example of how do you embed something on embed a dashboard on a page. So step one, you need to author this in QuickSight. This means that you will go into QuickSight, and embedding is supported in Enterprise Edition. So you'll go and author the dashboards. Then you can share it with the specific users who you want to view in an embedded form. You will whitelist the domain where the dashboard will be embedded. So this is important because as an admin or an author, you don't want your dashboards to be accidentally embedded in pages where your dashboards have no business being. So you as an admin or you are an admin will need to whitelist the domains where you allow embedding. Once you do that, you can then go into your AWS account and add a role in the account with reader permissions. So just before I go any further, I'm going to do this a little step by step so that we can quickly take a look at what this means. What does it mean to add a role in AWS with those permissions? And then we'll move on to the next step. So let me pull up my browser where I have QuickSight. To start with, let me show you where you can whitelist the domains. So this is the area where you whitelist domains. So you will go here and simply provide the domains that you want to, where you want your page to be, a dashboard to be embedded, and you have the option of including subdomains or not. And then you add these here, so it becomes a list that you allow for embedding. The rest of the functionality that we talked about, so author dashboards and share with user groups, pretty straightforward. In this account, I've actually done this in the Oregon region. So if you go to that region, I have a sample dashboard that we are going to use for this demonstration. So you'll notice that here I have created a bunch of visuals. I have data that's coming in from a data set. It's in Spice, so all that's set up. And what I've also done is to publish this dashboard, so it's all ready to go. So this is the dashboard that we are going to embed in today's session. Now let's get into that second step. So here I'm taking a look at the AWS account and making sure that I have a role which provides reader capabilities. So in AWS, I would go to my IAM, Identity and Access Management. And this is you doing it, or this could be somebody who's an administrator in your account doing it. And then I have an embed role that I have created. Now, what this does is that it has a permissions policy that's very, very specific to QuickSight. This user, the embedded user, gets no other access to your AWS account. So all you're allowing is QuickSight register user, which means that you're allowing that user to be registered for QuickSight. And then you're allowing get dashboard embed URL. So this is a new permission that we introduced along with embedding. And you can allow this user to get specific, when users come in, they will assume this role, and you can allow this role to get either access to specific dashboards, as I have done here, or you can allow them to get access to a bunch of dashboards. So you can just put a star here, and that will allow them to access any of the dashboards in this account. So that's what this user can access, and that's the role that we have provisioned in AWS. Now, the next step is, as an application owner, you have a server. So you have a server which is sort of talking to QuickSight and loading the pages necessary. So as your server is creating the page to be served to your end user, what you will want to do is call the AWS SDK to assume this role as the particular user. Now, let's take a quick look at this, because this step we'll just need to walk through it so that we're super clear about it. So what I have here is the assume role command. I just have a whole bunch of commands here, but I have so assume that this is my application server, and it is already authenticated with QuickSight. It already has all the credentials. At this point, I am going to allow this user, whose name is QS Viewer, to access QuickSight using this particular role. So when I do the assume role, AWS is going to send back a bunch of credentials. And what I would do then is to use those credentials. So let's say I have my access key, and this is all done programmatically. So none of this would be done, manually or in a second, and then you would pick this. So what I've done here is that the application server now has assumed the role that we just saw, which gives permissions to be a reader. And it also has provided the username here. Now, what I would do is then create that user in QuickSight. So remember I mentioned that we now have user and group APIs. So you can register a user, which means you're creating a user within this account ID, and you're providing a specific namespace. We'll talk about namespaces later in this session. And then we have the role that the on that we have, and then you have the session name. So this is the name that you are providing for this user, and then an email address that's associated with them. So at this point, when you register the user, QuickSight is going to go and register them as a user. In this case, this person already exists because I previously created this, so it's throwing an error saying, hey, this resource already exists. And then if you go back to QuickSight, you will need to make sure that this dashboard is shared with that user. So there's two levels of permissioning here. One is making sure that the user who's going to assume this role is given the right permissions. So we saw that right here. They are given the register user and then the permission to access the dashboard. And then on the dashboard front, you want to make sure that this has the users who should view this have access. In this case, I have done a share all, so I have said share with all users in the account. But I could very well, do this by sharing it with that particular user. So this is the user that we just created. It's already in here, and I could just share that with a single user. Now, what I've done so far is I've created the dashboard. I have the role in AWS, and as an application server, I have gone ahead and created the user that's necessary. And at this point, we call something called the QuickSight Get Dashboard URL. The Get Dashboard embed URL, this is the call that actually gets you an authenticated URL that you can use to embed. So right now, this has gone ahead and given you a signed URL that you can use to embed. I will need to encode this because we're going to pass this as a parameter to a page. So let's do it right here. This is all done programmatically. None of this will be something that you do by hand. And so this is the URL that we're going to use. And what I have is a demo page right here where it takes in, oops. Sticky fingers, all right. It takes in a parameter, which is the signed URL. And then we're going to go in here and load that up. So this page that you see here, what it does is it has this top banner and it has a bunch of controls right here. And everything below the controls is coming from QuickSight. So the dashboard that we saw right here is now embedded within this page. You'll see that the banner is different. There's no sign of QuickSight up here. And then you have these controls. Now, these controls can pass values into the page. So what you do here is every time you change this, the JavaScript SDK is passing that value to the QuickSight dashboard, and then that's getting refreshed by itself. So you'll notice that you can add in as many controls as you want, and it just works. Now, these controls can also be from QuickSight. So if you wanted a different approach to the page, you could have embedded these controls as part of the dashboard itself, and then simply loaded the dashboard without these controls on the page. So that's up to you as an application owner as to how you want to present this to your users. So those are the 4 steps. So what we did finally was we called the AWS SDK. We got the Get Dashboard Embed URL. This happened on your application server. And then we went to the application page. And on the application page in the code was the JavaScript SDK that embedded the dashboard on the page, passed parameters, and it also lets you handle error states. So this is the sequence of steps that you use to embed a dashboard. We posted a blog which we put out at reInvent that contains the link, the specific steps to do this. But remember that this is not the final, you don't just take the last URL that you get, and that's not going to be your embedded URL forever. You'll need to make sure that you call this sequence of steps when your page is loaded. So this is a flow that explains how this is done. So if you look at this, same sequence of steps that we followed right now, but more in the context of a user who's coming into your application. So you have a user who's requests a specific web page or on your web or mobile client. Your client then, the URL hits your application server. Your application server has the job to load the page that contains the visualization. At that point, remember this requires a license per user. So application server can confirm the identity with whatever user identity store you have, whether it's a database or Cognito or Active Directory or such. Using the username and the email address, the unique identifier, the application server can make a call to AWS SDS. So this is the assume role call that we made in the steps previously. AWS provides credentials for that assume role. So remember, we just saw that it returned a bunch of strings, so the session secret key, session token, and so on, that I then pasted into my command line. Once the application server has assumed the role on behalf of that particular user, it then calls QuickSight. So QuickSight, using the get dashboard embed URL call, it responds with the signed embeddable dashboard URL. So examples here. And when we talk about dashboards, a dashboard URL looks like this. The last part of that is the dashboard ID. And remember that this link will expire in 5 minutes. So that's more of a security feature. So what needs to happen is that every time your user requests a page, you will run through this flow and get a signed link. That signed link is embedded in your page, because the application server using the JavaScript SDK will put in the signed link on the page. And then the page is loaded on the user's device, which results in the user seeing the visualizations and the charts that you expect them to see. So this is the the full sequence of steps that happen when an end user comes in and requests a page that contains a sample, a visualization from QuickSight. Now, what I also want to quickly highlight is that we have on GitHub an embedding sample that takes you through how do you do this with Cognito. There's actually a very powerful example end-to-end. So you should definitely try this out if you're thinking about embedding dashboards or visualizations in your application. The link is in here. We can definitely send this to you as part of the chat in the Q&A section. Now, there's different ways you can do this. You can use Cognito, and then you can use an application server like you just saw, or you could have application pages where you don't really have a server, but using an API gateway and a Lambda, you use the get dashboard embed URL API call, so that you're doing this whenever there is a user coming into your page. Instead of standing up a server, and maybe you don't have a use case for a server, maybe it's more light. So then you can use an architecture like this, where you have an API gateway connected to Lambda, and then that gets the signed URLs for you after verifying the Cognito identity for each user. At this point, I also wanted to show you a real-life sample of one of these embedded dashboards. If you caught our session at reInvent, that has more details of this. But this is an embedded dashboard that the NFL has within their next-gen stats application. This is shared with hundreds of users across broadcasters, the teams, NFL research, where they go in and look at player stats. They look at different sets of data. All of this can be real time, because they look at this data as the play is happening, and the broadcasters in particular can use this to quickly find out who had the most passes, or who did this the most in the last 5 years. So there's a lot of filters that they have, and the biggest advantage that the NFL finds from this is the scalability. So when there's peak, there's no problem. QuickSight scales to it. There is no management, so they don't have to deploy servers or upgrade, downgrade at any point. NFL runs for the football season. When they're not using it, they are not paying for it. So that means that there's nothing to dismantle or stand down. They just pay for what they use during that period. And also, the interesting thing about this application is that the NFL team keeps getting requests from a lot of their stakeholders saying, hey, I want a new statistic. Can you help me do this? Can you find this new calculation? And what they've seen is that with the calculations in QuickSight, they're able to quickly add these to the tables that they show their users. And publishing an update to an existing embedded dashboard is very simple. All you do is just go update in your dashboard, hit publish, and it gets updated. So it's super easy and maintainable for them, and cost effective at the same time. Just search for the QuickSight session at reInvent, and you'll get more details on this from the reInvent session. So at this point, I'm going to quickly jump to the updates that we have from the last couple of months. So we're going to cover a few of these. We're going to cover the new pivot table. We have some new calculations that you can use, and recently viewed dashboards and such. So let me jump into the product and start talking about these. All right, so this is a QuickSight dashboard. First thing you'll notice is that in case you haven't already experienced it, we allow smaller KPIs now. So you can have smaller charts that let you build tighter, denser dashboards. It's been an ask from a lot of customers, and so we're very happy that we've been able to get this out quickly. The first thing I want to cover is our new pivot table. So here you'll notice that I have a pivot table that looks pretty much the same as before. But what you'll see now is that we have roll-ups. So for example, if you have numbers here, and as you pivot this data, so let's first think about the data. We have customer segment, we have different consumption channels, and we have them pivoted by the years. As you look at this data, if you wanted to simply view the roll-up, we now have an easy option where you click on this and say collapse all, and it quickly just collapses everything. If you wanted to do an expand all, you can also do that. It just expands all the metrics that have been rolled up. Now, one of the big asks for the pivot table has been totals and subtotals, and I'm glad to say that that's part of this release. So if you wanted to take a look at totals, you can quickly go and put down totals, and QuickSight adds those. You have totals on the column as well, so you can have totals both ways. Now, if you wanted subtotals, pretty much the same thing. So you click on subtotals, and then subtotals show up. So this is totals and subtotals for the pivot table. The other options that have been enabled with this release have also been around styling. So you'll notice that here we display the build amount metric that's just shown repeated multiple times. You have the option of clearing that up. Of course, that is useful when you have more fields. So let's say you had infra cost as well. So then the field name becomes useful, but when you have just a single metric, maybe you don't want to show that field name as much. The other thing that you can do now is add more rows and columns. Previously, we had a limit of 5 and 10. Now we have an updated limit of 20 and 20, so 20 rows and 20 columns. We also have increased the number of metrics that you can add inside from 5, and that's also been upped. You can also edit the column names. So for example, if you wanted to call this, let's say, year, you do that, gets updated right there. And then if you had this, you want to call this revenue and cost, you can do that. The same with the row names as well. So segment and channel. So that allows you to quickly, get this into a very presentable form that you want for your stakeholders. You will also notice that you can sort on the rows. You can sort by the metrics. So there's a lot of flexibility and functionality that's been built into the pivot table. I hope that you will check it out and then come back to us with any feedback that you have. The last piece about the pivot table that I'll want to leave you with is previously we had a limit on the number of rows that were displayed in the pivot table. Now this table starts off in increments of 1,000 rows, but it will load more data as you scroll. So you can have very large tables that are pivoted, and then you can just keep scrolling, and QuickSight will continuously load data. So that allows you to look at your extremely large data sets here with the performance of Spice or your database. All calculations here that you see are done on the server side. So that means that you're always getting the power of that underlying engine in a very easy to use format right here. The second thing that we're going to look at, so I'll just jump back to this, are the calculations. So you'll notice that I have some KPIs here, and the KPIs here are using some of these calculated fields up here. Now, if you look at the calculated field, you would have noticed that over the past, I'd say 3 to 4 months, we've been adding a whole bunch of calculations in here. So if you haven't already seen, we have running totals, we have percentage of total, percent difference, and then we had distinct counts. So there's a lot of things that we added. Now, what we added this month is SUMIF, COUNTIF. So there's a lot of these conditional aggregation functions that allow you to specify a condition and then include the numbers in your calculation. So for example, in this case, the SUMIF calculation takes the build amount if the condition here is satisfied. So you have the consumption channel is API and the customer region is US. Only in that case will this build amount be included in the calculation. And the denominator of this is the total build amount. So it's build amount across all the entities, regardless of whether they were API or country equals to US. So that's this allows you to build a lot of conditional metrics. Of course, the question that comes up at that point is, what about if else? If else is supported right now for direct query data sets, and we are going to support it for SPICE in the next 1 or 2 months. We'll have more updates on that in our upcoming webinar. The other function that I wanted to call out was the lead and lag. So previously, and this is last year, we released the lag function so that you could take a look at trailing data. So for example, if you wanted to look at data that was one before the metric that you're looking at. So you're looking at daily data and you want to do today's data minus yesterday's data. You could do that using our lag function. However, that would only allow you a lag of a single unit. Whereas now we have launched the arbitrary lead lag. So what this allows you to do is to go back X number of days or X number of periods when you do this calculation. So the use of this could be finding out the year-over-year difference. So you can find, if you're looking at yearly data, you're looking at this minus the previous year, or you could look at last 3 months. How's my data different from the last 3 months, and your lag would be 3, and so on. So this is definitely something that I would encourage you to try out and play with. And again, let us know your feedback. The other item that you would have seen is the recently viewed entities. So that whether you're looking at dashboards or analyses, you have this recently viewed items that show up first. So right here, that way you can quickly get to the items that you've been playing with. But also you have these sort options now, whether it's last updated or analysis name or dashboard name. So that way you're able to find the objects that you want very quickly. And then we have multi-select parameters. So let's go back to the revenue metrics, the same dashboard that we were looking at. And you'll notice up here that I have this control. Controls were added mid last year. So we launched them, but they only had single select controls. Now what we launched is support for multi-select controls. So in this case, let's say I only wanted to look at enterprise. I can take a look at that data and then nothing else. If I want to add on small and medium business, easy, or I can take a look at all. And the way to create this would be to go into parameters, and let's say you want to create a new parameter, and let's call this segment 2. So you have the option of either providing a parameter that takes in a single value or multiple values. So you can use multiple values, you can provide a default, and then you can create that. If you wanted to associate this with a filter, as you've seen right now, you could do that. So you just create a filter and then go in here, and let's say you use the custom filter option, say use parameters, and then pick from the segment that you want. So in this case, I'm going to switch this to segment 2 and say apply. And at that point, I can also go and add a control. So here, a control is what you see on screen, the drop down that you just saw. So you can say segment 2 control, and it's a multi-select dropdown, and you have the option of either specifying values. So in case you only wanted to show options for enterprise and SMB, you could do that. But in most cases, you just want to link to your um, customer segment, the data from the underlying data set. So you just do that. And remember that if you want these controls to cascade, you can use this option called show relevant values only. What that will do is if the first one selects, let's say, region equals US, then the second segment, and assume that the second segment was showing states, it would only select the right states for that region. But yeah, so you've got an on-screen control here with the same set of selections, and so that's quickly adding multi-select controls to your dashboard. Now, when we talk about dashboards and filtering, the other item that we have added recently is being able to bulk specify filters. So for example, let's take customer segment still as the example. And let's say that you didn't want to select from a list, but you have a list of filters that you want to copy paste. You can go into custom filter list and simply add the values that you want right here. So let's say you only wanted SMB and you hit apply. That would then filter this by SMB. I can apply this to all visuals. And that way you are filtering by whatever you specify here. And I could specify enterprise and apply. And that comes up here as well now. So that's a very easy way, particularly for users who have these values handy and they don't want to go and select from a list, or you want to send it to a friend. You can do that, and they can easily copy paste the data here and get the numbers and the metrics they want. You can paste up to 10,000 values here. So there's a lot of numbers or a lot of fields that you can paste in here. Allows you to work much easier with dashboards and filters. Now, in case you haven't seen this before, we also introduced an option late last year that when you publish a dashboard, you can specify whether you want your end users to see this left-hand side panel with visualize, filter, and all of that, and also whether they should be allowed to download the data. And you can specify that right here. Once you do that, so let's say that I say I don't want advanced filtering and I don't want CSV download of data, and I'm simply going to replace the dashboard that I have. You'll notice that I don't have that anymore. It's a clean dashboard just with the controls on top, and I don't get the option to download anything. All I get is to maximize this data if I want to. So that's quickly running through a lot of the visual functions, visual enhancements. I'll cover one more thing before we jump into Q&A, and that would be the updated join editor. So now in QuickSight, if you go to, let me see if I have the same dashboard. Actually, let me switch to my, because I've got a lot of different data sets connected here. Let me get into a database that I have. And let's say create a data set. So at this point, I have to pick a schema, and I can go next. So then instead of picking a schema and picking a table, what I'm going to do is edit preview data. And you'll notice that in this case, there's a slightly new UI here. Previously, we used to have some options here. Those are no longer there. That's moved here. So you have the custom SQL mode that's easily accessible from right here. And then you have the option to add data. So when I click on add data, I can go in and add a table. So let's say that I added all flights. So all flights is a data set that contains some historical flight information from the FAA. So I click on that, and previously I would not be able to join this table with itself. So there are many situations where I want to do a self-join. Now this allows me to do that. So all I do is click on this, and then I can pick from the fields that I want to join and go ahead and create that join. So number one, we've enabled self-joins. The second item that we've done is to enable cross-schema join. So if you add this table, and remember this table was from the schema called public. I have another schema called example, and that contains an airport ID. So I can go ahead and add that right in here, and then again specify the join condition. So in this case, airport ID has the airport code and the airport ID. So I just pick the airport ID, and we also have this search function that's much faster. So you just click on that and then apply, and you're done. So that gets you to join tables within the database across schemas and also with itself. So that's a list of all the updates that we've seen in QuickSight in the last 2 months. Embedding is definitely something that we wanted to highlight in this call. But the one item that I'll leave you with is one of our dashboards using the ML Insights. So if you take a look at this dashboard, this is what a dashboard powered by ML Insights looks like. You've seen that we've seen the graphs, we've seen the charts before, but the narratives right here, those are very unique to ML Insights. We have anomaly detection where you can specify routines that will run through and find anomalies in your data. And you also see that we have forecasting that's now enabled in QuickSight. All of this is done using ML. So there's there's very little that you have to do. All you do is you configure it, and then QuickSight does the work for you. So I'll quickly jump into one screen before we get into questions. So if you take a look at this dashboard, this is the same dashboard that we saw. The insights are something that QuickSight auto-generates. So it generates these insights, but you have the option of customizing them. So these are very powerful. Think of these as text boxes where you can add calculations, you can add if conditions, for loops. So for example, it could show you a day-over-day data that's formatted, or it could show you top 5 items that sold, top 5 decreases, and so on. Anomaly detection runs through your data and finds anomalies that are present. So it can run at a specified time, hourly, daily, weekly, and then look through and find the anomalies that might be interesting for you to look at. And lastly, forecasting is something that will allow you to easily forecast, but at the same time provide things like seasonality. You can set the sensitivity and so on. So if you haven't already signed up for this, I would really recommend that you go to our website and sign up. The links for the blog, the GitHub sample, and such would be something that we share on the chat now. So if you have any other questions, we can definitely run through them and answer them in the last 15 minutes now.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose. Before we jump into the questions, as Joe's mentioned, we have been pasting the links to the resources that Jose has mentioned for the ML preview sign up, as well as the blog around dashboard embedding in the chat window. So feel free to copy those out or bookmark them for yourself later. We will also be sending a recording of this webinar session out to all of the attendees. And the last housekeeping note is that when you have registered for this webinar series, you're automatically registered for all of these, and we're intending to do these on a monthly basis, where we'll be able to walk you through all of the new functionality that we've added in the month leading up to that session, so that you really get a good insight into what we're adding in the product, how you can use those features, and some tutorials and an opportunity to ask questions. So I encourage you to stick with the series as we continue to add more functionality, so we can keep you up to speed on what we're doing. Jose, I'm going to go ahead and read off some questions out of the Q&A window, and feel free to answer them. So the first question is, we have a website with no policy about public-facing websites. Can we still use embedding for public-facing content?
I think the clarification for me would be what is meant by public-facing website. So QuickSight does run on the internet. The endpoint for QuickSight is public-facing. But in case you embed a QuickSight dashboard, it can sort of only be accessed via the embedded interface. You definitely have the option of allowing access outside of your application, but it will the control to that would be limited to how you decide to present it. So if that meets the definition of not having it public facing, meaning not having public access, then this would work. But if you have more questions around that, feel free to drop me a note. I can put my email address in the chat so that we can talk about that.
Great. There's another question around the ML narratives about whether you can add URLs to drill into the narratives.
So URLs to drill into the narratives. We are working on adding links into the narratives so that you can have links that let you sort of click and then move out of those narratives. If you want to drill in, if you use parameters and pass in parameters. So we saw earlier in the demo that parameters were something that you could easily configure on a page. Now remember that parameters can also take inputs via the URL. So if you provide, let's say, a link to the page that contains values that are via the parameter, then those would definitely show up in the narrative as well.
Great. There were a couple questions about the ability to personalize some of the configurations to specific users. In this case, they're asking, can you configure dashboards where users are not able to see the filter panel and download CSVs at a user level, or if that's a property of the dashboard?
That's right now a property of the dashboard, so it's not a per user setting. One way to do that might be to have two different sets of dashboards, one for the authors, one for more advanced users and one for simpler users. But right now that is a dashboard level setting. However, you can have elements in a dashboard that are sort of customized based on parameters. So you can use either our features of row level security or dynamic defaults to personalize the dashboard for a user. The download to CSV and the advanced filtering, those are currently at a dashboard level.
Great. And then there was a question about, I'm sorry, I lost it here for a second. What of this functionality is available in standard edition versus enterprise?
So the functionality that you saw in terms of the pivot table, you saw the functionality around the multi-select parameters, the analysis features, they're all available in both editions. Embedding and ML Insights are currently in the Enterprise edition.
Great. And then there was a question that we had received via email before the session around email reports, which is something that we introduced back in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a quick question whether that was available. And then a follow-on question was, can email reports be configured to a specific user?
So email reports are currently available. That's something that's part of Enterprise Edition. You can just go in and start playing with it immediately. It's all public. We do have personalization coming in two forms. In the next few weeks, you should expect email reports with row-level security enabled that you can start using. So that way, each of your users can get a personalized email report that limits data just to what they should be seeing. In the months following, you should see us launch emails with dynamic defaults, which pretty much act the same way, but don't restrict data to that user. So if you're interested in the preview for row-level security emails, please do drop me a note with your account number and maybe a slight note about the use case. My email is in the webinar chat.
Great. And then there was a question about the calculated fields mode. One is specifically asking if we're going to add autocomplete for formulas and fields and a bigger text area and some general improvements to the usability of the calculated fields panel.
Yes, so those are on our roadmap. We are incrementally working through that. I think I also see a question that's coming up. I think Valentin says duplicate visual feature would be amazing. And what I want to tell you is that that feature is right around the corner. So you should have it in the next, I would say, a few weeks. And you should be able to duplicate visuals within an analysis.
And then there's one last question. I'll throw it to you, Jose, about conditional formatting.
Mm-hmm. Conditional formatting is something that we are working on. I would say that I don't want to promise dates, but it is something that's a high priority for us. So you should expect that fairly soon. It's not weeks, but soon. Actually, the other thing that I want to offer up here is we've seen requests previously for tabs within a dashboard. And that's something that we are working on. So in our upcoming webinar series, you should expect something on that pretty quickly.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Jose. Appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody, for joining. Again, this is our first session for customers, specifically to give you guys insights onto what we've added, how to use that, and what's coming. We hope that you attend the future sessions of this. Again, we'll be doing that on a monthly basis. If you've registered for this session, you've automatically been registered for the series. So you should have invites for those sessions going out across the year. And we look forward to staying in touch with you and getting an opportunity to communicate with you, answer your questions, and give you insights into everything that we're doing to make QuickSight better for you. And again, lastly, we will be sending out a recording of this session and posting it on the website. So keep an eye open for those links along with the slides as well. With that, I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining and look forward to seeing you next time.